Hello.
Our story continues inside of Awita's revenge, outside the capital planet of the intergalactic banking clans at Scipio. With only a mere few days since the assassination of Newt Gunray, much had happened. Cad Bane's crew was stationed on a moon of Scipio, watching over the system as fleets mobilized into position. Anakin, Dengar, Reiko, and Cad were all waiting for their moment to strike. They had been in tight communication with the Hutt crime family, waiting for their mark. Jabba sent them to Scipio immediately following their mission to Cato Nemodia, but they were all directed to wait, because the tensions following Gunray's death was bubbling over into an actual conflict. Tyrannus was trying to save everything from going too far overboard, but it was too late. The Sith plan was falling apart, because of a near-century-long grudge held by Jabba the Hutt, and ironically, no one in the galaxy tied anything back to the Hutts. The chase that occurred within the city, and throughout the skies of Cato Nemodia, caught the attention of the conglomerates, but no one really cared. It was clear this action came from one of the other intergalactic monopolies. The banking clans were receiving support from various sector authority and defense fleets. Due to their importance in the galactic market, their protection was highly necessary. The Techno Union and Trade Federation were already trading blows over their respective territories across the Mid-Rim, and the Commerce Guild was capitalizing off of what they could. What had become the accepted story, regardless of its factuality or not, was a group of bounty hunters hired by either San Hill, Wat Tambor, or Shu Mai killed opposition leader Gunray. There were some other monopoly heads included in this, but it was mostly assumed to have come from Tambor's court. Wat denied these claims, because he never hired anyone to kill Newt Gunray, but he wasn't going to allow the Trade Federation to openly declare war on him. Chancellor Palpatine and Count Dooku respectively tried to publicly call for an end to this conflict, but blood had already been shed, and by the Force these corporations would not be embarrassed. Losing home territory to an opposition conglomerate was not in their cards, and they would fight tooth and nail to maintain their image. This galactic turmoil, which sent markets spiraling out of control, is exactly why the crew of Awita's Revenge were waiting so patiently. They couldn't go in until they added the right amount of fuel to the flames. Maybe the Hutts shouldn't be doing this, but they had reached out to the Black Suns and Pike Syndicate to work together on this operation. It was kept quiet because they all wanted to capitalize off this war. They could slide in where these corporate demagogues left, because the Republic would be so desperate for any sort of control or stability. The Black Suns and Pikes negotiated a deal with Jabba specifically to ensure they could maintain eyes and ears on these competitors. It was because of this deal that the Pike Syndicate was able to inform Jabba, who then informed the Awita crew that Scipio was their target, and killing the entire banking clan council would add the right fuel to the flames. But if not them, then San Hill. See, based on reports from operatives from the three major criminal syndicates, there were rumors bouncing around that Count Dooku could unite the Commerce Guild and banking clans. Palpatine was working with these corporations to maintain peace, but Dooku was having more public success in this field. This didn't directly affect Palpatine's popularity either, because it was seen out of his control. However, the main focus that the crime families wanted to hone in on was a potential alliance forming between the guild and the clans. If they could stop the conflict from erupting between the two of them, then it would eventually de-escalate the combat between the Union and Federation. With their mark set, the crew left for the surface of Scipio. When they arrived, similarly to how they operated on Cato Nemodia, they landed on the outskirts of the main vault. The mission was simple: kill San Hill and vanish from the system. Cad Bane had other ideas about this direction, but he didn't communicate anything about it. He was leaving it up to chance if he wanted to truly go that route. If it looked favorable and profitable, then he would make a deal to support himself and of course his crew. The bounty hunters found themselves an overlook, where they scanned the facility from the outskirts. They were probably a good 12 clicks away from being on the main landing platform. It's why having someone like Reiko Hardeen around was always positive. Reiko was just scoping out territory. Making an accurate shot from here would be very difficult or nearly impossible. What was noticeable to the bounty hunter was the fact that what they saw in orbit was very similar down here on the surface. The Republic had mobilized everything they could to ensure the protection of the banking clans, and leading the operation on Scipio was Palpatine's own friend, Wilhuff Tarkin. He was here on behalf of both Palpatine and the Outland Region Security Force. It was one of the downsides to the Republic not having a standing military. They had to rely on regional support in cases of conflict. With a steady fleet and protection on the planet, their hope was that they could de-escalate any fighting with the other monopolies. The hope being that a quote-unquote Republic fleet being present would deter conflict. Yet, as the 4 bounty hunters were preparing to move towards the main vault, more reports came in from across the galaxy. Minor monopolies, or in other words, not as large as intergalactic ones, were starting to war with each other as well. These warring factions had their own private military forces, most of them being battle droids, and they were all fighting for control over their power in the galaxy. For these corporations, it was a lot more than just ego or imagery. It was the power they had over trade lanes and supply lines, and influence within the government. These smaller corporations were targeting the weaker-looking Federation, because they could gain their own traction with territory belonging to the major player. It was all falling apart, and none of these 4 bounty hunters responsible for it had any clue. Like, they had a little idea, but how big it had gotten since they arrived at Scipio was beyond them. After hours of trekking through the snow, they eventually arrived outside the main facility. The vault was buried deep inside, and the entire building was heavily defended. Reiko spotted a dozen guards protecting the lower entrance. It was clearly used in case of emergency, and these guards were being switched out every 20 to 30 minutes. The fresh rotation clearly meant that there were hundreds of guards operating inside the facility at a time. Cad scanned for another way in, but unlike the Federation headquarters, there wasn't a direct path through ventilation systems into the building, aside from the main entrance, and they didn't want the attention this time around. Anakin tapped Bane on the shoulder and pointed out a squad of men moving about on the outside of the facilities. He suggested that they take them down and use their uniforms to get inside. Look, it would make them weak, but this was an important heist, right? The biggest score they could ever get, yeah? Cad sighed heavily. It was their best shot, considering this was also an assassination, but it would also work in their hands with this plan. They quickly moved down the mountainside to intercept the squad of men on patrol. They killed each of them rapidly and replaced their own outfits with the blue uniforms of the security officers. Cad was fuming because he hated the tiny hats used by these Republic dogs, but Dengar called him cute to piss him off, and it worked. The 4 men moved up the hill and were let into the facility due to having their uniforms ready to go. No one thought anything of it, because they were all appropriately dressed. Now that they were inside, they needed to find Sand Hill and the Council. Cad led the way, but eventually forfeited this role to Anakin, who fit in the most. Aside from a scar here or there, he had the cleanest military-looking face. Dengar, Racco, and Cad filled in behind him. Racco's tattooed face didn't really help with maintaining an inconspicuous look. They maintained a clean and professional look by walking in formation until they got into an elevator that brought them up into the main lobby of the vault. But they weren't the only ones visiting the banking clans. The Jedi and/or the Chancellor dispatched 2 Jedi Knights to assist with the protection of this location. The 2 weren't recognizable by name, but one had dreadlocks and the other one was a Twi'lek. Cad and the apparent Jedi Master locked eyes for a short moment, before each of the bounty hunters scurried away in a professional manner to ensure they didn't entice the Jedi anymore. Without any knowledge of where to go, the 4 were left to walk around nearly aimlessly. As they continued their movements, they darted into a stairwell and ran up it. They were worried, especially Cad, that the 2 Jedi would follow them here. As they were moving up the stairs, they exited and found a number of Muns waiting outside of what appeared to be the vault. Sand Hill himself walked up to them and greeted each of the guards, thanking them for getting here so quickly. Sand had been displaying paranoia since he was contacted by Count Dooku, and the entire situation with the Federation was making him even more anxious, so he had called a unit of guards to visit the vault with him to make sure it was protected. He was unaware that the Jedi had already arrived, so he was preemptively checking the vault because their mission was more important in his eyes, the mission being his protection. The leader of the clans opened the vault and told the guards to rush in quickly, have their weapons at the ready, and make sure the vault was locked down. Anakin nodded and told his squad to fan out. They did, speedily moving into the vault with their weapons drawn. Cad grabbed each of the allies and told them his secondary plan. He wanted to expose the documents of the banking clans, hoping that it would expose credit lines, deposits of trillionaires, and even potentially showing fraudulent accounts. Cad's selfish hope was to expose the entire reserve to the galaxy, take a couple million credits, and retire. Of course, if he could get more, that'd be great, but this could be their way to the promised land. He deposited a chip into each of their hands and told them exactly what to do with it. They were to go to a terminal in each sector of the vault, plug it in, and let it do its work. When it was finished, They would meet at the entrance, gut Sand Hill and the rest of the council, and get the hell off of Scipio before something else went down. As they were running through, Cad got to work on the main vault, plugging his device in and hacking what he could to make sure the process was easier. What he didn't realize was his information on the vault was out of date. The banking clans changed their vault setup, so everything flowed through one main terminal. Sure, it could be accessed across a facility, but with what Bane wanted to do, it had to be done through the main terminal, which is where he was. Dengar and Racco clocked this much earlier than Anakin did, leading them to reunite with Cad before the Jedi entered the vault. Sand Hill was telling the Jedi about the squad of guards that entered the vault just minutes before they arrived. Master Quinlan Vos told Ayla to remain here and wait for more guards to arrive. He was going in with Sand Hill. She nodded her head. Cad and the other two kept their eyes open for Anakin, but he wasn't anywhere to be seen. His chip got stuck in the console he plugged into, and he started to panic as any 15-year-old might. When it got unlatched, he started running towards the main gate. Just as he started moving, blaster fire could be heard, with the whooshing of a lightsaber. When he got to the main corridor, he saw a green lightsaber bobbing around and deflecting shots back at the other guards, who were clearly his squad. Cad yelled out, telling Anakin to be careful, as the Jedi had betrayed them. Quinlan stumbled, tripping over Sand Hill's dead body. Anakin ducked away. At the same time, the three bounty hunters rushed out of the vault and told the massive group of guards that the Jedi had betrayed them. They needed to be arrested. Ayla looked from side to side and shook her head, but the green lightsaber emanating out of the darkness told the squad of guards that Quinlan was the traitor. Ayla tried to stop their pursuit of her master, but as she moved in to block the guards, she noted the other three individuals running away, the same ones that her master told her to be wary of before they got here. She was stuck. Did she stop the guards from potentially hurting her master, or did she stop the perpetrators? More blaster fire erupted behind her, as Quinlan continued to defend himself. She turned to help him, hoping that she could bail her master out of the situation. As she prepared to ignite her weapon, she was decked by Anakin, who didn't even see her. The two of them fell over, Anakin slamming into an adjacent wall after running into her. He was looking at the other Jedi as he ran down into another corridor of the vault to avoid that Jedi Master. Anakin's eyes moved to Ayla's hip, where her lightsaber was no longer placed. He panicked and rushed out of the way, slipping over himself and escaping out of the vault, catching a glimmer of her lightsaber in her hand as he did. Just as Anakin escaped, he could see his three friends waiting for him at the elevator. Bane waved the kid on, telling him to hurry. His blood pumped as he put everything he had into running. Right behind him ran the other Jedi, noticing the other dead Muns outside the vault. Dengar and Racco pulled their blasters and fired in Anakin's direction. He ducked but continued running, putting a hand over his head so he wasn't killed by accident. Cad continued calling out for Anakin, telling him to get here now, and as he reached his other hand out for Bane, he heard a whizzing speed by his head. A blue blur slammed into the back of the elevator, forcing everyone between Ayla and the weapon to fall in one way or another. Anakin looked up and saw the door shut, and from the elevator itself threw a lightsaber back into Ayla's hand. She pointed her weapon at Anakin and told him to explain the situation to her. He smiled. Yeah, about that. He kicked her hand, but it didn't knock the saber from it. Luckily for Anakin, another couple guards were coming down the hallway to save their comrade. He slipped away as she was fired at, but defended herself adequately. Just as Anakin thought he had caught a break, by slipping down into the stairwell, he was trapped again. He made a genuine good time too, but she disarmed the other guards and leapt down the stairwell and beat him to the bottom, which Anakin manually descended. When she landed in front of him, he put his hands up and communicated that she had caught him. Doing what is what she wanted to know. She didn't know what they were doing inside the vault, and she didn't even know that Sand Hill was killed, but she asked Anakin to explain everything to him in great detail, because he was in the vault when everything happened. So he told her the truth. He was sent in with his squad to investigate the interior of the vault, because the leader of the banking clans was paranoid. When they went in, they split off, and what he saw was the head of Sand Hill, the lightsaber, and the rest of his squad running. She knew something was off with this story, but what it was, she didn't know. So instead of trying to understand, she told Anakin that her master was in real trouble if he was accused of what Anakin said he did. She knew for a fact that Quinlan wouldn't ever do that, and she'd be damned if Anakin and his little buddies got away with doing whatever it was they did. Anakin rolled his eyes and told her that she as a Jedi could act all moral and whatnot, but that was the truth. Her lightsaber raised as she shoved it towards his neck and stopped. The heat was insane, but it caught his attention, as he told her that they could talk this out. and she nodded her head. That's exactly what she planned on doing here. Anakin was left in a weird predicament. He was an opportunist, so he could make the best out of the situation for himself. If he wanted to escape the bounty hunter way of life, then this Jedi warrior was his way out. He could negotiate this as a ticket into a semi-regular lifestyle, or maybe he could even spare his squad from this. Perhaps even the mighty moral Jedi could see the evil of these entities or conglomerates. She told Anakin that her master was in danger, and therefore her order was in danger, especially if they were blamed for the death of Sandhill. Anakin tried playing the whole why should he care about the Jedi business because they didn't care about him shtick, but Ayla didn't honestly want to hear it. After the fact, sure, but right now, not at all. Ayla told Anakin to tell her about the guards she saw now. The heat on his neck was starting to burn, and he tried to get some distance, but what little he got was enough until he told her the new reality. The guards he was serving with were here on behalf of some dude named Dooku. He was the one that she and the Jedi wanted. Ayla called that ridiculous. He was a former Jedi and political idealist. He wouldn't have anything to gain from trying to screw over the banking clans. She removed her lightsaber from his neck, but continued to allow it buzzing by her side. There wasn't a shot in hell that she would trust Anakin for saying that, but for the sake of this mission, she needed the ally. Anakin asked her what he could get out of this, and she promised him that if he could help her clear Quinlan's name, then she would clear his. Anakin seemed hesitant because he wanted his other friends to be cleared as well. She shook her head. If they got lucky, and they escaped, then she would call off any potential pursuit. He thought for a moment and agreed before asking her what he could do to help this process go by any easier because she didn't fully believe the Dooku thing. Well, that was the difficult part. The Jedi needed proof that Quinlan wasn't the one who killed Sandhill, and to prove that, Anakin would need to convince the other guards that the reason the leader of the banking clans was killed was not because of his squad or the Jedi. He could say that it was someone that wasn't specifically his squad, but a squad of rogues came in to assassinate the banking clan leader. If they could prove Quinlan's and therefore Anakin and his squad's innocence, she let him off easy without even a questioning. She could promise that much. He nodded his head, willing to make the best out of this deal. Luckily for him, he was riding pretty well following his previous mission from Kid Nemodia, something his new ally didn't need to know about. She led the two of them up the stairs and out into the hallways, where a dozen or so guards were strewn about, completely unconscious. Anakin pointed at them and said that wouldn't make her case much better, and she looked at him without a hint of amusement. It was supposed to be a joke, but you know, self-defense leads to one thing or another. Anakin chuckled to himself as he followed behind Ayla into the vault. They entered the room, where even more guards were gathered, and on his knees, in front of the vault and a number of Mun bankers and executives was Quinlan Voss. He looked very annoyed, but when Ayla and Anakin entered, he was confused. Why would the kid come back with her, or even agree to do this? Anakin waved his hands, jumping in front of Ayla, telling everyone that there was a total miscommunication going on here. The traitors that they were worried about weren't the Jedi. A rogue group of assailants ran into the room following him and his squad, and assassinated the counselors and Sandhill. The Jedi Knights were simply reacting by protecting themselves. The Mun executives turned around with disbelief written across their faces. Clearly this was a lie. Anakin tried to continue to convince them, but they seemed unwavering. Ayla watched Quinlan, curious to see if there was a plan in his mind, and he was eagerly waiting to see what she had come up with. As Anakin started to ramble off track, she expressed that she had seen a number of Sector Authority forces trying to rob the banks. She said that those individuals weren't with the man that was with her, expressing that the Sector Authority had lessened their control over their ranks in the years leading up to this incident. The Jedi had been wary of it, which is why they were sent here with the blessing of the Supreme Chancellor. The Jedi weren't exactly supposed to disclose this information, but at this point, she was hoping it would quell the tensions in the room. It actually worked like a charm, but it didn't work because of Anakin and Ayla. It worked because one of the executives had a panic attack. Their entire vault had been raided, with credits dispersed across the galaxy, while also showing off a number of their secretive transactions to favor certain politicians within the Senate. All of their accounts were released to the public, essentially. Cad Bane's plan to hack the vaults was only intended to make himself and his crew rich, which it probably did, but it also meant that millions of documents alongside trillions of credits were also released out into the public. Due to all of this being held within the vault as non-physical money, it was transferred into various accounts. Didn't matter who got it. All that did matter is how it exposed the banking clans as a whole, and the executives were now panicked. Anakin and Ayla stood side by side, as the individuals in the chambers freaked out, and tossed the keys to Quinlan's cufflinks in front of him as they stormed out of the room, trying and hoping to rectify the situation for the clans. Everything was going so badly and they needed to make this right immediately, before they lost control over Republic credits. While the execs went off to certify their own doom, Quinlan freed himself and confronted one of the bounty hunters he encountered inside the vault. As he rose to his feet and stormed over towards Anakin, Ayla placed herself between her master and Anakin. She said that she promised him freedom without questioning. Quinlan gave her a look, before turning back and telling her to handle the rest of it then. He'd report back to the council about their mission. Ayla turned around and told him that she promised not to question him, but she would ask if there was anything he'd be willing to share. He grinned and told her that he had plenty of information that might catch her eye. She asked what, and he told her that his communication code was the first thing. Sure, charming, but not now, telling him that she could break her promise if he wanted to keep this up. Turns out all those years of being around Dengar and Racco turned Anakin into a bit of a quipster, but he didn't need to aggravate the Jedi. She was here to finish an official mission, and as far as Anakin was concerned, her mission was about to get much more difficult. He told her that in all seriousness, he didn't have anything to say. Their quarrel wasn't with the conglomerates, he was simply here to complete a job. She asked if there was someone within the Corps that hired him, and he shook his head. His finger pointed down, as if to gesture that he came from the Outer Rim, just without saying it. Ayla understood, she was from down there, but it also didn't make a whole lot of sense. She told Anakin that she was appreciative for his ability to compromise for the collective betterment of both of them. He smiled and gave her his communication code, expressing that if she needed any more details, then she knew where to reach him. Ayla reluctantly took it, because her only interest in this was what these bounty hunters from the Outer Rim wanted with the head of Sand Hill. And just as Anakin started to walk away, she called out, asking him if he had been to Kid Amodia any time recently. He stopped in his tracks and turned around, smiled, and then left. Inside of a cantina on Coruscant, the now 21-year-old Anakin Skywalker sat in silence. He watched the screens in front of him, as the entire bar quietly stood side by side. Another attack in the continuation of the business war had people gasping at who they really were. They were gambling the lives of millions for profit, and while they had been doing that long before the conflict, they were openly parading their march of death across the galaxy. This particular showing was of a destroyed apartment complex on an Outer Rim world. The Techno-Union was an unstoppable force, and Wat Tambor took control over the power of their military when Gunray died. The Federation lagged behind, especially when their assets were declassified in the leak from Scipio, the same one Cad Bane caused for his own benefit. Anakin and the crew of Awita's Revenge hadn't spoken since that day. When he left Ayla, he looked for his friends, but they had abandoned the planet. By the time he returned to Tatooine to find them, they had found themselves a new pilot. Anakin never said anything to them and had to return to full-time work so he could actually make some credits for himself. He had apparently received a payment from the Scipio heist, but it wasn't actually placed into his account, because it was under Cad's name. More proof of the slavery that Bane had subjugated him to. Skywalker nowadays wasn't as much of a bounty hunter as he was a smuggler that was more efficient at mercenary work. Anakin was hired for killing people frequently, and with the galaxy devolving into chaos, it allowed him a chance to profit off of the war dogs from Canto Bight. They needed quick and easy hires to take down their rivals, so that's what Anakin did. He still hated the job, but without someone like Bane breathing down his neck all the time, he found some sense of comfort in this line of work. He did vow to himself to find Shmi and go home to her on Mapuzo, but he was still earning his cut before returning to her. Anakin wanted to make sure the two of them could be set free for as long as they needed. More or less, he wanted to give her an early retirement on their reunion. Anakin decided that he would wait out the conflict, but it went on much longer than he anticipated. However, due to this raging war not being the Clone Wars prepared by the Sith, there were some significant changes. The first major one was how Palpatine lost his re-election. The Chancellor was supposed to have 2 terms, and in the middle of his second one, this conflict started. He wasn't able to fix it before the end of his term, and as a result his popularity was at an all-time low. Revisionist history also didn't help his case either, because people blamed Palpatine for the blockade of Naboo, because he was technically Chancellor during the blockade itself. Palpatine was in a very unfavorable predicament, and he couldn't claw himself out of it for the life of him. As a result, he was forced to step down following the election and begin anew, which mostly resulted in him consulting Dooku on how to go forward with this. Sidious wanted to use the CIS to win over the role of Emperor again, and he planned on convincing the Queen of Naboo to allow him to take Amidala's spot as senator so that he could join the Confederacy. But Padme had a much higher popularity than Palpatine at this point. He had forgotten about Naboo as Chancellor, and most importantly, he allowed Gunray to get away with the murder of thousands during the blockade. They didn't need to follow him anywhere. This relegated the Sith Lord to working in the shadows, but this also didn't grant him the results he was looking for. Sidious needed a military if he wanted to take the Republic back. The new Chancellor worked remarkably well with the conglomerates, and used her influence to convince them to enter some ceasefires. These only lasted between few parties and for a few days or weeks, but it was something. The Chancellor had a lot of ground to cover, and that was exactly why Palpatine was struggling. All the militaries in the galaxy, aside from the clone army, were at the disposal of warring factions. And sure, the clones were elite troopers, but they would only serve him well if they were a part of the Republic military. Otherwise, it would make the Confederacy look incompetent. It would make their army feel forced, and it wouldn't allow the Sith to actually obtain control over the galaxy. The curse of the clone army was the fact that they couldn't be used unless there was a galactic divide, one between governments, not business entities, and therefore, Palpatine was stuck. Dooku, who was a fiercely independent person, was forced to bear the weight of Sidious's tampering. Palpatine wanted to be involved in everything, and while Dooku's track record wasn't great, due to something happening out of his control, he wasn't able to get Sidious to leave him alone. The dynamic between Tyrannus and his master had always been hands-off, because there wasn't a need for Sidious to be in Dooku's business. But now, Palpatine had no business for himself. Naboo rejected him wholeheartedly. No one wanted to or had time to work with him, and therefore, his biggest concern was projected onto Dooku all the time. This led to resentment from Dooku specifically, and because he had his military leaders ready, without a military, he decided it was time to do something erratic. The Sith plan had failed, and with new opportunities on the horizon, it was his chance to take control for himself. After all, Dooku wasn't married to the Sith or to Palpatine. His goals was to restore balance and unity to the galaxy. With the most powerful entities and elites tearing each other apart in a droid war, which was slowly becoming the popularized title of the conflict, Dooku could seize the moment and have Sidious dealt with. So, that's what he did. While Sidious was off-world attempting to build rapport with new allies, Tyrannus brought in his own allies for what would have been the Clone Wars. These included Asajj Ventress and General Grievous. He also hired a number of bounty hunters, survivors of the box, something Anakin had accidentally participated in. He was looking for work when he ended up inside of the box with a bunch of others, so he was pretty much forced to join in on this mission to kill Sidious, even though he wasn't a 15-year-old anymore. His flight from Coruscant was long and boring, but he continued to keep an eye on the constantly changing galactic events. He was 21, and he was responsible for the beginning of the conflict that started 6 years beforehand. He never realized how far this would go, but much of it truly had been a Cold War. The Jedi, like his semi-acquaintance Aayla Secura, had been involved in the conflict, but never as generals for a side of the war. They aided in relief work, which Dooku was relatively neglectful of. He didn't care. The Jedi and the Republic were a curse on the galaxy. He wanted both of them gone, but until he could destroy both of them, he needed to get rid of his master. When these various mercenaries arrived at his castle, they were informed of their directive. They'd be killing the former Chancellor. With individuals like Ventress and Grievous around, Anakin believed it'd be a walk in the park. They were just traveling a short distance to accomplish this mission anyways. They'd be dropping off at the system in question and hunt down this monster. Dooku described this mission as a political assassination, meant to end the conflict between the major warring factions, even though that's not what it would do. They didn't really care about this aspect, aside from Grievous and Ventress. To most of these people, they were here for the enormous payout. Dooku promised a huge sum of credits because he knew only a few mercenaries would survive the encounter with his master. What Tyrannus managed to overlook was the constant paranoia his master lived in, especially since losing the role of Chancellor. So when the bounty hunter squad jumped him at Eridu, he was ready. Anakin was a little disappointed that he didn't get to make amends or get revenge on the crew that had abandoned him at Scipio, because he truly hadn't seen them since the incident. but he'd have much larger concerns to worry about on Eridu. Sneaking up on Palpatine wasn't like jumping an elderly old man. Sure, Palpatine looked old on the outside, because he was, but the Sith Lord was maneuverable unlike anything else ever seen. When he realized he was being hunted by Dooku, his lightsabers ignited, and he attacked the incoming mercenaries. Sidious promised each of them a painful death, using his sabers and aggressively attacking everyone nearby. Some individuals were force choked and killed in an instant. Others were sliced through by the sabers. Grievous and Ventress were the only ones who seemingly had a chance of fighting this machine. Their sabers collided across the courtyard of the governmental building they trapped Sidious at. Anakin and the few bounty hunters, not immediately killed, stood back and took pot shots at the Sith Lord, while the two other duelists held their own to the best of their abilities. It was a chaotic array of light, and everyone involved, aside from the highly trained Sith Lord, struggled immensely. Sidious slammed down on Grievous and disarmed him, before doing the same thing to Asajj. He electrocuted several other survivors and launched Anakin and the hunter he was next to into the wall, knocking both of them unconscious. When they woke up, there were echoes of blaster fire. Anakin looked to the other hunter, bloodthirsty for credits he was promised by Tyrannus. Skywalker, on the other hand, watched this bounty hunter next to him rush to his feet and run into combat, where he was cut down almost instantly. Sidious was holding off Ventress as the remains of Grievous were scattered across the courtyard floors. Anakin had enough of this, and got to his feet, running in the opposite direction and abandoning the planet. He was here for one last go at the game, before returning to his mother. This monster put so much fear into him that he refused to remain a bounty hunter or a mercenary or a trained killer. He couldn't do it anymore, because this line of work wasn't for him. He used the ship Dooku lent them and vanished from the system. Sidious didn't even notice Skywalker's departure, because his only focus was revenge, and Anakin was just a face in the crowd. Instead of hyperspace, Anakin contacted Aayla Secura to inform her that the Chancellor was some sort of evil Jedi. He didn't know the terminology, but he knew that this type of thing was something the Jedi were looking for. The two of them had spoken a couple times over the years, but they never actually saw each other. It was Anakin just checking in, testing his luck, and found that he had absolutely none. In a funny way, Aayla was following this trail from Scipio, the one regarding Dooku. Anakin threw a name out into the air and she believed there was a case for it, because he was honest about pretty much everything else, but she'd been struggling to find any proof. Aayla hadn't taken on a student of her own since becoming a Jedi Knight, because she was dedicated to finding out this case and getting to the bottom of it. She typically didn't respond to messages from Anakin immediately, so she wouldn't hear the Eridu story for another couple weeks. This, in Ayla's mind, wasn't disrespectful. It was simply a different frequency. She contacted Anakin on his communication code from her second device, not her main one. She didn't want Anakin to be able to track her, is all. Not that he would, but you never know. Aayla checked the second frequency every couple weeks to see if new information from the Dooku case was getting anywhere. The weird thing is, despite Anakin throwing the name off the top of his head on a whim, it was still holding up. She would get further along and feel like she had hit a wall, then some evidence would come out. It was just difficult for the Jedi to actually intervene, and it was entirely due to the scandal revolving around her and her master's involvement at Scipio 6 years ago. There was almost public backlash from the Jedi being present, so the corporations threatened the Council, telling them that they'd go extinct if they were ever found meddling around their facilities again. Not all the corporations felt this way, but the biggest ones did, especially the Techno Union. This was also part of the reason that Palpatine was no longer in office. This led to the case being so difficult to crack for Aayla, but she was getting closer and closer to a fuller story. She had been tracking Dooku with her friends Nadar Veb and Kit Fisto. There was some sort of plot surrounding Dooku, and Anakin was right about it, but how right, she didn't know. When Aayla did get the message from Anakin, she responded immediately, and asked to speak to him directly. She'd have to travel from Coruscant to Mapuzo, where she would find Anakin on a homestead that had been abandoned. He hadn't spoken to his mother yet, because he was afraid that she would reject him, especially because it took him so long to abandon the path of bounty hunting. His mind was eating him alive about it, so Ayla's company was very welcomed. Their conversation mostly revolved around what he saw, and he did take a lie detector test. It proved everything she believed about Dooku, but even more about the former Chancellor, because if Dooku was someone working with Palpatine for so long, then he had to have known. Ayla had tracked the two over the course of the past 6 years, because they started meeting publicly a lot. She couldn't give the evidence to the council because there was no direct proof of something evil going on, but this first-hand account could have the answers she needed to finish off this case. Following their focused conversation about the investigation, Ayla would tell Anakin to go see his mother, because no matter what, she would be glad that he found his way to her. He may have felt like he had failed, but he would never know the truth until he confronted its reality. It was here where he stopped playing the game instilled into him by Dengar, Cad, and Racco. He'd been trying to be the funny, flirty guy, and he stopped over the past few years, but here he realized the importance of this friendship. Anakin greatly appreciated her kindness in exchange for this information, and before Ayla left, she told him that it wasn't in exchange for anything. It was just decent to be a good person. Anakin would watch Ayla in her Jedi shuttle leave Mapuzo, as he took a speeder across the farmlands to a local town, one of the larger ones on the planet. It was busy, like Mos Espa, just without the constant crime. There were obviously sprinkles of it, but nothing like Tatooine. Anakin parked a speeder on the outskirts of the town and spent a couple hours wandering around, when he was found by his mother. She could see that there was change, but it wasn't as great as she hoped it would be. But after another several years of being separated, they embraced, and she brought him into her home. Shmi hadn't fallen for anyone, but she had a nice corner apartment above a store that she worked in as a clerk. It was honest work, and she enjoyed where she lived. It was an older district in the town, and it was much more quiet than most of the other places around the galaxy. She and Anakin would spend day and night catching up, as she watched the transformation of her son before her very eyes. Anakin was tense and on edge the entire time he was present, but he started to mellow out. The look in his eyes wasn't tired and resentful. It was still present, but it was hopeful and filled with courage. He was beginning a new chapter, and Shmi encouraged Anakin to find home here on Mapuzo and start fresh. His ship was on the outskirts of the town, at the abandoned homestead, but he could be a navigator here. She knew how badly he wanted to see the stars, and if he hadn't gotten tired of them, then that would be a great step forward. Anakin considered it, and thought it sounded really pleasant, but there was something else. He realized how much he desired purpose. Part of that purpose came from the fact that he had seen evils far greater than the Hutts, and he wanted them extinguished. It left him yearning for more from himself, but he couldn't describe what that more could be. Outside of Mapuzo, the Jedi were obligated to check out this case from Ayla Secura. She had been working on it for years, and because she wasn't known to hold wild ideas or be rather radical, like the late Master Qui Gon Jinn, they felt obligated to check out her case. What none of the Jedi were aware of were the assassination attempts on Dooku's life that had become really relevant since Anakin reported his findings half a month before. Sidious was attempting to get his revenge against a very sturdy and healthy Dooku. Saber combat would be a nightmare for Palpatine, but if he could weaken Dooku, then it would assure his instant victory. Sidious could, on all accounts, likely win a duel with Dooku, but he preferred to be safe, because it mattered more to him to find victory. As the Jedi were preparing to make their move to Serena to investigate the Dooku case, there were changes on the galactic scale conflict. Aside from no one knowing about the clone armies, the droid forces from each of the respective factions were running low. On a galactic level, of course, the Republic didn't permit this type of conflict, but they also didn't have the forces necessary to stop it. The Chancellor didn't force conscriptions because it would absolutely damage her term, so they elected to just allow the conflict to complete on its own. The Republic military had grown, and it was defending itself, but aside from that, this was an all-around droid conflict. It was what made the Separatist movement look even more fragile. Many systems were willing to join Count Dooku, but because the Chancellor allowed these businesses to destroy themselves over competition, especially from the Techno-Union, they favored the Republic. The Confederacy was a threat to ending these concerns, and if the Republic itself would just allow these corporations to deteriorate naturally, then perhaps there was a saving grace for the system. Those who represented the conglomerates within the Senate lost their seating, and bills had already been put in place for the end of the conflict, and blocked from ever being overturned when the Droid War actually ended. It was an assurance to protect the Republic and galactic interests from these businesses. The Techno-Union was the greatest concern, but while these groups were fighting each other, new territory was brought under Republic control, and therefore protected, because none of the combating entities wanted another enemy, like that of the Republic. The Jedi made their move regardless. Dooku was a threat, and they combated him by bringing in some of their best members. This left Sidious in an especially weird predicament, because he made a move against Dooku at the same time. Who knew Tyrannus was so popular? As it turned out, Dooku was the center of the universe, as the Jedi Council descended on him to learn more about this dark Jedi seen by the trusted navigator Anakin Skywalker. Yeah, Anakin had to stretch the truth just a little to make Anakin more believable because she trusted what he told her. At the same time as the war between Jedi and Sith were coming to a conclusion on Sereno, Anakin was visited by some old buddies. This was by happenstance, complete coincidence. Cad was stopping in on this planet so he could capture an escaped double-crosser. The individual had screwed over Jabba, and also, yeah, even 6 years after showing off what the banking clans had in their accounts and taking some of their credits, he was still working for Jabba. It was quite jarring for Anakin to see them, because he assumed they abandoned him, when in reality that was never the case. They staked out for a couple days and waited for him to return, but he never showed himself. Reiko wanted to search more arduously, but they couldn't get any closer with the arrival of more Jedi to the vault, so they left. Their contacts within the prison systems never picked up on him, and no one had seen him in the Outer Rim. Anakin nodded. He hadn't been in the Outer Rim except for that one time he was spying on them to see if they had actually abandoned him, which appeared to be the case. But Anakin was also doing work in the core. It was lighter work, and he was trying to make a more honest living. Cad slapped Anakin's back and told him he'd grown all up on him. He stopped him and asked the kid if he wanted to do one more mission with Oida's revenge. Cad had to hire another pilot, but it would be their last chance to get together for another shot at the big times. Anakin asked Bane how he lost all of his money after their hack, and he explained that they never actually received it. All their work, and they had helped more people than themselves. It was a pretty stupid situation, and sure, Cad could be happy about helping random people around the galaxy, but he was scum. He didn't care about those rapscallions. He wanted money for himself and his crew. So all this time, Anakin thought they made it big and hid out on Canto Bight or whatever, when in reality, they were right back to work for Jabba. They did make a shiny penny off the job, thanks in part to Jabba, but that wore out real thin because the value of the credit plummeted with the droid war commencing. Anakin understood. It had been hard, but he told Cad that he would join them. Truthfully, because it was Anakin, they didn't need to make a big deal out of it. Anakin asked why, and they told him that they were going to intercept Wat Tambor's shuttle and blow it out of the sky. Jabba believed that in killing the leaders of the Techno Union, he and the Hutts could grab more space. The Hutts and the other crime syndicates had a falling out, which kinda led to a miniature civil war in the Outer Rim. Cad and the rest of the crew knew it was dumb, because in doing this mission, it would allow the Republic to find victory and become unmatched. The Union was the biggest threat in the galaxy. Now with Count Dooku of the Fractured Confederacy dead, Anakin tilted his head, and Bane threw his hands up. It didn't matter. Guess the Jedi finished their job or whatever, it just didn't matter. Anakin told Cad that he'd join him for one last shot, because killing Tambor was the right thing to do. Bane wrapped his arm around Anakin's back and told him he'd gone soft on him. What was with that? Anakin laughed a little as they walked side by side towards Oida's revenge and called up some. Anakin agreed to this mission because it should realistically be a pretty morally positive mission. He was tired of the conflict, because civilians did get hurt for no reason, so he was in. When they got back to the ship, Anakin hugged and dapped up Dengar and Racco, who were both very excited to see him. The new pilot was a younger guy, a bit younger than Anakin, but he wasn't thrilled to see Skywalker. The crew, which wasn't a very sentimental group, felt like they lost a piece of them when Anakin was lost to Scipio. He was their pilot, and they had to replace pilots every other mission. Jango joined them for a little bit before leaving to raise his son, which he was still doing relatively peacefully on Kamino. Regardless, the Oida's revenge lifted off, for one last hurrah. Anakin knew he wasn't coming back to them, but he wanted to make the best of this mission. They had their captured individual from Mapuzo in the bay of the ship, tied down. The new pilot was guarding them, and Anakin was in the cockpit with his three brothers. When they exited from hyperspace at Skako Minor, they saw the massive Techno Union defense fleet. A battle was coming, and Cad instructed Anakin through their waypoints. They were going to hide in the asteroid belt that had clustered up just north of the fleet, and wait for Wat Tambor to leave the flagship. It took maybe 2 hours for him to abandon the ship for the surface. As he did, the incoming joint fleet of minor corporations left hyperspace and engaged the Techno Union. This would finish off the droid war, and Wat planned on watching his victory from the surface. As his shuttle descended to the surface, guarded by vulture droids, Anakin pressed out of the asteroid belt. Cad and Dengar told Anakin all about the upgrades to the ship before this. He was very excited. They dropped down and chased the shuttle, and once they were noticed on the radar, the vulture droids broke off, as a number of them from the surface were deployed to stop the attackers from killing Tambor. Anakin weaved past the retreating vultures before firing down into the back of the shuttle, which was heavily defended. Skywalker spun the ship around as Reiko behind Anakin launched the missiles. They locked on, but they were blown to pieces by flares that pulled them away from the ship. They were in the atmosphere. Awita's Revenge dove down hard, launching itself with immense speed. Anakin fired the blasters on the front of the ship, as Cad activated the underbelly sentry, which whipped around and started firing on the approaching vulture droids from behind them. Anakin weaved the ship regardless, as the rest of the crew smiled in enjoyment. This is what they'd been missing. Skywalker slipped the ship around and fired more shots into the back of the shuttle, which busted an engine. As they continued dropping through the skies, the wave of vulture droids approaching them became visible, as Dengar flipped another switch, activating the deflector shields. But the funny thing is, they didn't need them. They never needed them with Anakin. These upgrades were only added because no pilot, aside from Jango, could fly the Awita's Revenge like this. Anakin dipped below the shots and ran the control yoke up and down, side to side. They broke through the cloud cover, and the missiles were launched into the back of Wat Tambor's vessel, detonating it in the skies over the Skako Minor facilities. They weren't finished yet, they had to escape next. Anakin jolted the ship down, forcing G's onto the people inside the ship. This also launched the new pilot in the cargo bay into the wall. Anakin grinned, and spun the ship several times in a row as he pulled her back and dove down towards the following vultures, firing away. He shredded the droid vessels before pulling back and spinning up through the clouds and out of the atmosphere. As they looked to their left, they could see the Techno-Union fleet breaking. It was the beginning of the end, and they leapt into hyperspace, back towards Mapuzo. Before they could get their happy endings, Cad would kill the new pilot, because he freed the prisoner and tried to mutiny while they were in hyperspace. Dumb idea. Not really bright, but it was an extra incentive for Anakin to join their crew. When they landed on Mapuzo, Dengar informed Jabba that they would return soon, as Cad and Racco asked Anakin if he'd be willing to join their crew again. As they were saying this, a Jedi shuttle landed next to them. Anakin smiled and shook his head. He told them that he'd always be a friend if they needed one, but his loyalties lay elsewhere. He had almost found himself, and he wished to finish that journey first. Cad respected it. He didn't like it, but he respected it, telling the kid he had come to see as a son that he was thankful for all their adventures. A lot of the sentiment from the crew wasn't present before Anakin's disappearance. It wasn't until after they lost him that they realized how much they all respectively adored him. He was a crucial part of their crew, and well, he had a much larger galaxy to chase, one without wars, Jedi or Sith, and without the Hutts. As a former slave, he was picking the right path for himself, and the crew respected it, each giving him big hugs and wishing him well in his journey. They all said goodbye with smiles, and departed from Mapuzo to Tatooine. Behind Anakin was Aayla Secura and Jedi Master of the Order Mace Windu. He had come here himself to thank Anakin for unraveling a plot for the Jedi. He explained that few of their brothers and sisters survived the fight with the Sith, but they were forever grateful for this information, as it led to the downfall of their ancient rival. He looked at the ship and expressed that perhaps he had been up to something else, and Anakin bluntly, maybe too honestly for his own good, told the Jedi Master that they had just killed Wat Tambor. A wave of relief washed over Mace's face. The stress of the combat for 6 years had been immense. He stepped towards Anakin and held out a medal. The Jedi didn't do this much, but they were always appreciative of individuals who went above and beyond their civic duty. Mace looked over at Aayla, realizing that Anakin was probably a retiring bounty hunter. But you know, if it works, why bother worrying about the ethics? He could act like he didn't see anything, just this time. Mace handed the medal to Anakin, and he looked at it. A golden tint filled his eyes as he scanned a beautiful medallion that held the emblem of the Jedi Order. It was gorgeous, and he told Mace that he wanted his mother to meet them. The two Jedi followed him into town and struck up some small talk, but overall, they never covered the extent of his work with those bounty hunters. Aayla knew that they were Anakin's old squad, but it was good to know that he'd found his own calling in life. Shmi would be overjoyed to know that her son had truly made a difference. The methods, maybe not preferable, which got a good laugh from the two Jedi, but she was honored to see Anakin recognized by the Jedi Order. Mace congratulated the family, and Shmi offered them to stay for dinner, which they would accept. It'd be a beautiful time, and while it would end at the end of the night, it left Anakin with a hopeful outlook on the future. With the droid war over and the Republic taking back its control, greed and corruption started to wither away. The Hutts would never have the control they wanted from the war they started. This dinner with the Jedi wouldn't lead to any extra affairs with the Order. Anakin and Ayla would actually become really good friends, as they helped each other with varying missions. Anakin even watching Ayla take on the training of Ahsoka Tano at one point or another. Ayla would be Anakin's best woman at his wedding, and hell, even Cad, Dengar, and Ratko made an effort to show up, being his best men. Why wouldn't they? Free booze, free food? Duh, it was a bounty hunter's dream. They didn't get too wasted, but it was a hell of a celebration. The resentments Anakin held for the crew had dissipated, and now, here on ppsw, where Anakin found his home, it was where he would remain. He had great friends, an amazing family, and a part in restoring true order to the Force and to the galaxy. And that, my friends, is a pretty wholesome part 2 to our PP story. Wait, hold on. Special thanks to the patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Jack Silver, Prismatic Warlock Master, Lyndall Asher, Smoobs, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, General Alexander, Robin Roberts, Blackie Chan, Alexandra Reese the Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick 5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pyramark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galvin Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewu 670, Anakin Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Jenny Nguyen, Santa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Calic, Youngling Slayer 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, For Dyslexia Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Mary 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Let's actually talk about the story, Sith Clone Wars on Saturday. Now that the both parts are over, let's talk about the story. So, first things first, parted stories. If you guys want to see more of them, we'll do more of them, just so I can tell longer stories with you guys. For everyone's sanity, I'll probably do part 1 of 2, part 2 of 2, or however I want to do it, if that makes more sense. Check the title, let me know what you think of that. Otherwise, 2-parted or 3-parted stories will probably be more common. Not every story is going to be a parted story, just because not every story is deserving of the length. But, you know, let me know what you thought. Full movie will probably come out at the end of each month, and that's probably how I'll do things from here on out. But the story itself, tons of fun. I actually really wanted to go into part 2 with the idea that you might see Anakin become a Jedi. I like the idea of telling these chapters, and also let me know what you think about the chapters, because it kind of leaves some ambiguity about how the story's going to go. Found, lost, the Jedi, the Sith. You know, found is about him being found by Cad Bane, and lost is about him losing himself, and the Jedi is about Ayla Secura, and the Sith is about the Sith as a whole. So, you know, you have this cool thing where you can have a lot of fun with how each of these titles and chapters are perceived, especially for these parted stories. So I like that aspect about doing this as a parted story. The idea itself with Anakin becoming a bounty hunter in this timeline, I wanted to go a much different route than the previous bounty hunter story we did, and even being raised by Jango. I wanted this one to be a little bit more combative, a little bit more edgy, but also have a bit of wholesome towards it. And it really becomes more wholesome in part 4, and I wanted that to kind of overlap. There's a time gap, there's a war, and I really wanted the galactic events to be drawn out from what Anakin and the crew did on Kid Nemodia. And it's in this story where it differs from the Jango and the Bounty Hunter story, where it actually makes a really big galactic impact, where Anakin's mission seems small, but it leads to unforeseen events. And I really liked that approach with this specific story. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed the story I had here for you guys today. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.